The mall's closing announcement echoed over the speakers as Sarah tucked her phone into her pocket. She had 1 hour to lock up and finish inventory for the bookstore. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly as she scribbled down the day's numbers. The mall was eerily quiet now, its usual hum of life replaced by unsettling stillness. Sarah loved her job, but she hated the late shifts. The sprawling mall, so full of energy during the day, felt like an empty shell after hours. She rolled down the security gate for the bookstore and walked into the main atrium. The vast space was dimly lit, shadows pooling in the corners. Her footsteps echoed as she headed toward the service hallway. The air smelled faintly of cleaning products and stale food from the nearby food court. Halfway to the exit, Sarah froze. A faint metallic clinking sound echoed from deeper in the mall, like keys jangling or a chain dragging across tile. Probably just maintenance, she muttered, trying to convince herself. But the sound seemed too deliberate, as if someone wanted her to hear it. She quickened her pace, the sound growing fainter behind her. Reaching the service hallway, she felt a wave of relief as the emergency exit came into view. Just as she reached for the door handle, the mall's lights flickered again, plunging the hallway into brief darkness. When they came back, something felt different. The silence was thicker now, oppressive. Sarah glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing at the end of the hallway. Nothing. Just shadows and the faint hum of the overhead lights. She shook her head, chastising herself for being so jumpy. As she pushed open the door, a low metallic groan echoed from the atrium. It sounded like one of the old carousel rides shifting, though it was shut down. Curiosity got the better of her. She turned back, her footsteps hesitant as she made her way toward the sound. "Hello? Is someone there?" Her voice echoed, swallowed by the vast emptiness. The carousel sat at the heart of the atrium, its chipped horses bathed in dim, flickering light. The ride was still. But as Sarah stepped closer, she noticed a single horse moving gently, its pole creaking as it swayed back and forth. Her stomach tightened. The carousel had been broken for years, its mechanisms completely dismantled. The horse shouldn't have been moving at all. She stepped back, her pulse racing. "This isn't funny," she called out. The words sounded small, swallowed by the cavernous maw. The metallic clinking sound returned, louder this time. It was coming from the food court now, echoing through the empty space. Against her better judgment, Sarah followed the noise. The food court was dark, its tables and chairs stacked neatly. The sound seemed to come from the far corner. As she approached, she saw something glinting beneath one of the tables. A single chain, rusted and coiled like a snake, lay on the tiled floor. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. She fumbled to pull it out, squinting at the screen. The message was from an unknown number. "Leave now." Her hands trembled as she stared at the screen. She typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came instantly. "You don't want to find out?" Panic bubbled in her chest. She turned to leave, but froze as the chain began to move, dragging itself slowly across the floor toward her. She stumbled backward, her breath hitching. The chain stopped, coiling itself neatly before going still again. The air felt colder now, heavy with an unseen presence. She bolted, running back toward the service hallway. Her footsteps echoed wildly, mixing with the faint clinking noise that now seemed to follow her. Reaching the hallway door, she shoved it open and slammed it shut behind her. She leaned against it, heart pounding, trying to catch her breath. The sound stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then a faint whisper echoed from the other side of the door. "You can't hide." Sarah backed away, her eyes darting to the emergency exit ahead. She sprinted toward it, her fingers fumbling to push the crash bar. The door didn't budge. She pushed harder, but it was as if the door had fused to the frame. Panic surged through her veins. The whispering grew louder, surrounding her now. It wasn't coming from behind the door anymore. It was coming from the air itself all around her. She spun around, searching for another exit. The hallway seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly in both directions. "Help!" she screamed, her voice cracking. The sound echoed, but there was no response, just the faint hum of the lights and the growing whispers. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down at the screen, dread filling her. Another message. "Turn around." Tears welled in her eyes. She didn't want to obey, but something compelled her. Slowly, she turned, her body trembling. The hallway wasn't empty anymore. A figure stood at the far end, shrouded in shadows, its shape shifting and distorting like smoke. It began to move toward her, its footsteps slow and deliberate. Sarah backed away, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The figure raised an arm, pointing directly at her. Its voice was a guttural whisper, impossible to understand, yet she felt the meaning. "You don't belong here." She turned and ran, tears streaming down her face. The hallway seemed endless, each step taking her further from escape. Suddenly, the lights went out completely. She skidded to a stop, plunged into total darkness. The whispers surrounded her, louder now, overlapping and chaotic. A single light flickered ahead, revealing the atrium once more. But it wasn't empty anymore. Figures stood in the shadows, dozens of them unmoving. They watched her, their hollow eyes glowing faintly. One stepped forward, its smile unnaturally wide. "Stay with us," it said, its voice like gravel. Sarah screamed, running blindly into the darkness. The figures didn't follow, but their whispers lingered, growing fainter as she fled. When she finally reached the emergency exit, it opened with ease. She stumbled outside, collapsing onto the wet pavement as rain poured down. Looking back, the mall was dark and still. But as she caught her breath, she saw a single figure in the doorway watching her. The next morning, her manager called, furious that the store had been left unlocked. But when Sarah returned, her keys were still in her pocket. No one believed her story. The cameras had recorded nothing unusual, but every night since she's dreamed of the figures, their whispers haunting her. The hum of fluorescent lights echoed through the empty mall as Emma set her cleaning cart near the food court. Her shift had barely begun, and already she felt uneasy. The mall's usual vibrancy was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. The closed shops seemed to watch her, their darkened interiors like yawning voids. Emma sighed, pulling on her gloves. "Just a few hours," she muttered. She grabbed a mop and approached the sticky spill near the ice cream counter. The sound of her mop dragging against the tile filled the air, amplifying the silence. It wasn't the first time she'd felt watched while working late. Finishing the spill, she returned to her cart and froze. A faint scraping sound echoed from the far end of the food court. She peered into the shadows, her pulse quickening. "Hello? Anyone there?" Her voice trembled, but the only response was the faint clatter of chairs shifting. Emma walked cautiously toward the noise, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. One of the tables was overturned, though she'd just passed it moments ago. She set the table upright, her hands trembling. The scraping noise returned, this time louder, echoing from the direction of the carousel in the atrium. The carousel was Emma's least favorite part of the mall. Its chipped, faded horses seemed lifeless during the day, but at night they felt like silent sentinels. She approached cautiously, the air colder near the ride. The carousel was still, but one horse's head was tilted unnaturally, its hollow eyes locked on her. "Stop it, Emma," she whispered, shaking her head. She turned away, but a faint creaking sound made her spin back. The horse was now facing forward. Her breath hitched. The lights above the carousel flickered, casting shadows that danced like figures around the atrium. She hurried back to her cart. Grabbing her walkie-talkie, she called for mall security. Static hissed in response, followed by a faint whisper she couldn't understand. Her stomach twisted in fear. The walkie-talkie went silent. Emma gripped it tightly, scanning the empty mall. A distant metallic clang echoed from the direction of the service hallway. "Okay, just finish and leave," she muttered, trying to steady her shaking hands. She wheeled her cart toward the hallway, avoiding the atrium. The service hallway was dimly lit, the fluorescents buzzing faintly. The door to the utility closet stood ajar, though she distinctly remembered closing it earlier. She pushed the door open, her flashlight illuminating the small room. Cleaning supplies were scattered across the floor, as if someone had rummaged through them. Emma bent to pick up a broom, but froze as she heard the door creak behind her. Turning, she found it swinging shut on its own. The door slammed with a force that made her jump, plunging the room into darkness. Her flashlight flickered, the beam catching a shadow darting past. "Who's there?" she yelled, her voice cracking. The air felt heavier now, the small room suffocating. The shadow darted again just outside her flashlight's reach. A cold draft swept through the room, extinguishing her flashlight entirely. In the darkness, she heard a faint, chilling whisper. "You shouldn't have stayed." Emma scrambled for the door, her fingers fumbling for the handle. It wouldn't budge, as if something on the other side was holding it shut. Panic set in. She banged on the door, screaming for help. The whisper grew louder, closer, wrapping around her like an icy wind. Suddenly, the door flung open and she stumbled into the hallway. The air outside felt stale, the lights flickering ominously. Her cart was nowhere in sight. The whispers didn't stop. They seemed to follow her, weaving through the air like tendrils of smoke. She ran toward the atrium, desperate for an exit. When she reached the atrium, she stopped short. The carousel was moving, its haunting lullaby echoing through the vast space, though no one was there. The horses spun in slow, jerky movements, their hollow eyes glinting in the flickering light. One horse's mouth seemed wider now, almost like it was smiling. She bolted for the main entrance, her footsteps echoing like gunshots. But the doors, always automatic, didn't slide open. They stayed stubbornly shut. Turning, she saw shadows pooling beneath the carousel, rising like smoke. They twisted and formed shapes, humanoid but wrong, their limbs too long, their heads tilted. The figures began to move, stepping off the carousel and onto the tiled floor, their glowing eyes fixed on Emma, their movements unnatural and jagged. She backed away, her heart pounding. One figure raised an arm, pointing at her. A voice, deep and distorted, echoed, "You can't leave." Emma screamed, turning to the glass doors. She banged on them desperately, her fists leaving smudges on the pristine glass. The shadows closed in. A loud crack echoed through the mall as the carousel ground to a halt. The lights flickered wildly, casting the atrium into intermittent darkness. When the lights steadied, Emma was alone again. The shadows, the figures, the moving carousel, all gone. The mall was silent, as if nothing had happened. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, making her jump. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number. The message read, "Next time, listen to the whispers." She stumbled out of the mall as the doors finally slid open. The night air was cold, but it felt like a relief after the suffocating indoors. Emma never returned to work. She quit the next morning, leaving no explanation. But every night since, she's heard faint whispers outside her bedroom window. No one believed her story. The mall's cameras showed nothing unusual that night. But every employee knows the truth. After closing, the mall isn't empty. The mall's loudspeakers chimed one last time, signaling its closing. Alex, the janitor, finished locking the entrance. His shift was just beginning, but the silence was already oppressive. He wheeled his cleaning cart through the empty corridors, the wheels squeaking loudly against the polished tiles. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, their glow casting strange shadows. The food court was his first stop. It reeked faintly of grease and stale soda. Tables sat in eerie stillness, their chairs pushed in like obedient children. He bent to pick up a stray soda cup rolling lazily across the floor. As he tossed it into the trash, he froze, hearing faint, shuffling footsteps. Alex straightened and glanced behind him. The food court was empty, just rows of empty chairs and abandoned counters. He chuckled nervously and shook his head. "Must have been the air vents," he muttered. His voice sounded too loud, breaking the stillness. He continued wiping the counters, his ears straining for any other sounds. As he worked, the sound of distant creaking reached him. He froze again, gripping the rag tightly. It sounded like the carousel in the atrium. "Come on, Alex, it's just the old gears," he whispered to himself, pushing his cart out of the food court. He headed toward the atrium reluctantly. The atrium was vast and eerily quiet. The glass ceiling revealed a cloud-covered moon, its dim light casting an eerie glow over the motionless carousel. The chipped paint on the carousel horses looked dull in the light, but their glassy eyes seemed to follow Alex as he passed. One horse looked oddly twisted. He glanced at it again, convinced it was different from the last time. Its mouth was stretched wide, almost into a smile, the paint cracking along the edges. Alex quickened his pace, the wheels of his cart squeaking louder now. The mall's silence seemed heavier, almost as if the air itself was pressing down on him. Reaching the restroom hallway, Alex started his cleaning routine. The harsh smell of bleach filled the air as he scrubbed the sinks, trying to ignore the growing unease. That's when he heard it again. Whispers, faint and indecipherable, coming from the direction of the service corridor. He paused, his heart thudding in his chest. He turned off the water, the room falling silent except for the sound of his own breathing. "Hello?" he called, his voice cracking slightly. The whispers stopped abruptly, as if whoever, or whatever, was speaking, realized he'd noticed. Alex's hands shook as he packed up his cleaning supplies and stepped back into the hallway. The service corridor stretched into darkness, its flickering lights casting long, uneven shadows. Alex hesitated, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. He moved closer. The metallic smell hit him first, sharp and acrid. He wrinkled his nose as he ventured further in. A faint clatter ahead made him stop in his tracks. His flashlight beam swept the floor, landing on an overturned mop bucket. Its dirty water was spreading slowly, reflecting the dim light like a dark mirror. Alex crouched to pick it up, but froze when he saw the footprints. They were bare, wet, and led further into the corridor. His heart raced. The footsteps were small, as if left by a child. But the thought of a child being here, barefoot in the dark, sent chills down his spine. He turned to leave, but the service door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang. He jumped, the flashlight trembling in his hand as he spun around. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice echoing down the corridor. The only response was the faint, growing hum of whispers, louder now, coming from all directions. The flashlight flickered as the corridor seemed to narrow, the shadows on the walls twisting unnaturally. The footprints ahead seemed fresher, the water still glistening. Alex backed away, his breathing quick and shallow. He tried the service door, twisting the handle frantically. It wouldn't budge, the cold metal unyielding under his grip. The whispers shifted into low laughter, deep and resonant. Alex turned, pressing his back to the door. At the far end of the corridor, a shadow moved. The figure was tall and unnaturally thin, its limbs bending at impossible angles. It tilted its head as if studying him, before stepping closer, one jerky step at a time. "Nope, nope, nope," Alex muttered, abandoning the door. He sprinted toward the atrium, his footsteps echoing wildly. The corridor seemed longer now, stretching endlessly ahead of him. When he finally burst into the atrium, the oppressive air nearly knocked him over. The carousel was spinning slowly, though no music played and no one was near it. The horses moved with jerky, unnatural motions. Their painted eyes seemed alive now, glinting as they turned to face him. The lead horse's mouth opened into a grotesque grin. The whispers were deafening, swirling around Alex like a suffocating fog. He clutched his flashlight like a weapon, though he knew it would do nothing. A loud crash behind him made him whip around. One of the mall's mannequins had fallen from a display, its head rolling unnaturally toward his feet. He stumbled back, tripping over his cart. The carousel's lights flickered violently, plunging the atrium into near darkness. When they came back on, the horses were gone. "Where did they go?" Alex whispered to himself, his voice trembling. He scanned the room, the shadows seeming to shift and move like living things. The sound of hooves clicking against tile froze him in place. Slowly, he turned, his flashlight beam landing on the lead horse. It was walking toward him. Its wooden body creaked with every step, the paint on its legs cracking as it moved. Its hollow eyes locked onto him, unblinking and full of malice. Alex ran. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he had to get away. Behind him, the sound of hooves grew louder, faster. He ducked into a side corridor, his flashlight barely illuminating the path ahead. The walls seemed to close in, the whispers mocking him with every step. The exit sign came into view, its green glow like a beacon of hope. Alex sprinted toward it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The glass doors were locked. He pulled at them desperately, his palms slipping on the cold surface. Behind him, the sound of creaking wood grew closer. He turned, his back against the doors. The lead horse stood in the center of the corridor, its head tilted. Behind it, other shadows moved, their shapes wrong. The carousel horses emerged from the darkness, their bodies jerking unnaturally. One by one, they surrounded Alex, their hollow eyes glinting in the dim light. "Please, no," Alex whispered, tears streaming down his face. The lead horse stepped closer, its wooden jaw creaking open, revealing rows of jagged, splintered teeth. The shadows enveloped him, icy and suffocating. The whispers turned into guttural laughter, echoing through the empty mall. The lights flickered one last time before everything went dark. In the morning, security found Alex's cleaning cart abandoned in the atrium. His flashlight lay on the floor, flickering weakly. There was no sign of him. Rumors spread among the staff. Some refused to take night shifts, while others whispered about the cursed carousel and the shadows that lingered in the corners. Months later, the mall shut down permanently. Locals avoided it, claiming to hear faint whispers or see figures moving behind its shattered windows. Alex's name faded from memory, but every so often a passerby swore they heard banging on the locked doors, accompanied by desperate whispers begging to be let out.